Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Stigmeyer, and I work with the online writing lab, which we lovingly call the OWL. And I'm also an assistant professor at Concordia University, Irvine. Today, I wanted to share some information with you about common assignments and how to write them. There are several different types of assignments that you would write in graduate school that might be a little different from what you did in undergrad, in your undergrad studies. So I wanted to share those with you. So first, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about the OWL, and then we'll get into the presentation. So first of all, the OWL has, what we do in the OWL is we provide individual direct feedback to students on their writing. So I'm going to give you some background information on how to write a paper, but at the same time, know that when you finish a draft, you're always welcome to come to us and get feedback. So we have two schedules. Let me take you to the welcome schedule. This changes seasonally, but right now we're in spring 2026. And so you can see you're always looking for the OWL. So we have written feedback and Zoom consultations. So what this means is when you have written feedback, you just get direct feedback on your work through comments. You would submit your paper, and then from the date of your appointment, you would receive the paper back within 48 business hours. And that would exclude Sundays or holidays. So that's what that is like. And then for the Zoom consultations, you would sign up for a time and meet with a consultant to discuss pretty much whatever you'd like with your paper. So you don't have to have a draft finished. You could even just come to us and ask about the writing prompt and tips for or ideas for how to get started. You could bring a couple of paragraphs and we could work with you on, planning for the rest of the paper. Or of course, you can bring a finalized draft. And so these appointments look like this. Right now, our schedule's pretty open because the summer schedule's just beginning. But you would just click on one of these white or open spots after registering and getting all set up. And then you give information about your program, the paper, what you'd like us to focus on, and then you can attach your paper here. Like I said, for the live consultations, you don't have to upload anything. For the written feedback appointments, even to make the appointment, you need to upload something. Let's say you make the appointment 2 weeks in advance. Well, at that point, you may not have your paper done. So what instead you could do is just upload a Word document that has the prompt in it, or something like that. So, and then make sure though, on the day of your appointment, you upload your paper no later than midnight. And we just ask that you cancel appointments at least 24 hours in advance, because when we do get busy, we want to empty that space up for someone else. Okay, just wanted to share a little bit with you about that. Another thing I wanted to share is that there is this guide we've created in the OWL with resources for graduate level writers. So we have how to get the support, tips on APA formatting, tips on, academic writing, so integrating research, or what are the principles of academic writing? How do you write paragraphs? What does peer reviewed mean? That sort of thing. And actually, some of this information, the writing specific types of documents, is what I'm going to cover today. So that's another resource. And then as you got to this event, I just want to encourage you to always keep updated on this. The OWL events are blue, And then the library also offers some events, usually during the school year, not in the summer. All right, so let's get started. So in this presentation, I just wanted to focus on three types of assignments. First is the reflection paper, and then I'm going to refer to the research paper and literature review kind of together to show you the differences. A reflection paper is usually quite informal, but there are some important guidelines to it to keep in mind so that you can make sure it's not simply a summary, or something that AI could write, but you're actually taking your experiences and examples and really reflecting on them in with intention to guide your thoughts and to demonstrate your critical insight and growth. So these three bullet points down here are really the focus of what you want, how you want to think about these. Usually these, like I said, are more informal. You can usually use I, me, my, first person pronouns because they're your experiences. But be sure to use specific examples. When I see a reflection paper that has 0 examples in it or no application to a situation that you've observed, that's when I think I or a professor might think, well, this could have been written by AI. You really need to personalize it more. So using specific examples and applying what you're learning in the course concepts or theories, and then showing how that integrates with your examples is really important. And that what that ends up doing is emphasizing reflection, like intentional reflection, where you gain knowledge from the experience and you're taking time to actually think through it. So I wanted to show you an example of what might be a good summary for perhaps an introductory paragraph, but would not really be a great example of how you would integrate your experience or examples. So this paragraph says, MTSS is a framework schools use to provide academic, behavioral, and social emotional support based on student needs. It includes 3 levels of support: Tier 1 for all students, Tier 2 for targeted small group effort, and Tier 3 for intensive individualized interventions. MTSS focuses on early intervention, collaboration, and using data to improve student outcomes. Now, here's a paragraph with a bit more. You'll see that the examples and experiences are integrated more into this information. So during my observation of a 5th grade classroom, I saw MTSS used during a math lesson on fractions. The teacher first taught the whole class, then worked with a small group of students who needed extra help understanding equivalent fractions. The teacher used exit ticket data to identify which students needed support. This observation helped me see how MTSS uses data and targeted instruction to meet different student needs. So, like I said, this would maybe be a great opening paragraph in that it's just showing here's the class concept and this is what the paper will be about with citation note. And this one is integrating the experience through an example in order to show the student's observation of MTSS tier 1, 2, 3 support at work. And then I wanted to also expand on this. So this is what you've already seen. This is perhaps like an ending part of a reflection paper. So this was helpful to observe because my previous conception was that MTSS had mainly benefits for tier 3 individual intervention. I knew that the whole group and small group instruction types were typical educational models. However, I now see they are part of the MTSS approach from ASCA. I want to continue to learn about how these approaches can inform my future instruction. So it's just kind of a like, this is my takeaway. Here's what I thought, and now here's what I realize, and how I can move forward. So you can see that when you begin a reflection paper, you begin with your context. Identify the material and why it matters. So this could be the summary paragraph I showed you. Give some general definition of the concept and back those up with APA formatted citation. And then at the end of your intro, you can present a clear thesis. So for example, this reflection paper provides information about MTSS and how teachers can apply the 3 tiers of MTSS to practice classroom situations. And then, like I mentioned, really just connect to course concepts. So whatever you're reading about in your textbooks or the class content you're viewing or learning from your professor, this is where you are really demonstrating that next level of learning. So you could think about it as Bloom's taxonomy, right? At the bottom, we're just like kind of regurgitating knowledge. And that's kind of, maybe a little step up would be thinking about that knowledge and how you can like remember and, grow with it. But then up the upper levels of the taxonomy are more like synthesize and analyze. And apply, because that's where you're really showing your understanding of the concept and how to integrate it within what you already know. So you can use brief quotes or paraphrases to support your connections, depending on what type of reflection it is. And then emphasize interpretation over summary. As always with graduate level writing, you want to keep the writing organized. That's actually part of having an academic paper, is thinking about that 3-part structure, the intro, the thesis, and then the body, and then concluding. So just having that general framework in mind. The other thing in this regard to keep in mind is academic work, or really most good writing, starts broadly and then gets narrow. So what that means is you start by defining the concept, you introduce it, but on a more general or broad format, and then you keep narrowing it down to your thesis statement, and then you bring in specific examples, and that makes it even narrower. So that's the kind of flow for academic writing. And a couple of just typical things to avoid or think about in your wording. We usually avoid contractions, so write those out. Informal jargon, we want to avoid, like really, sometimes I take out even very. Oh, I always see just and try to remove it. I say it all the time, but you have the chance to use like merely or only, those kinds of words that are just considered more professional or more formal. And I wanted to say, usually get away from saying things like the results were astonishing or, shocking, because that shows a value judgment you're putting on and on that finding. And with scientific writing, with academic writing, you want to just have a neutral stance. Usually we use the third person, so we can avoid the I, me, my, we pronouns. But with reflection papers, it's a bit of an exception, where first person is generally allowed. Always proofread thoroughly and apply correct formatting. And then in the body of your paper, like I said, you're going to organize them by key points, anchored to a specific example. Analyze how each example supports your thesis and links to a theory, and include citations as required. Again, emphasizing critical analysis. So here's an example. Based on the analysis, this is the prompt. of your experiences in cycle 1, identify specific professional learning goals and describe next steps for your professional growth. So you can see it's taking the class concept and then thinking about the student's goals and that application. So step 1 would be to add an introduction that could serve as a thesis statement. And this says 1 sentence, but it's just it depends on the length and everything. Usually it might be more than that. But this is kind of an idea of how to, maybe from a discussion board prompt, you would be given just a paragraph or 2. So based on my experiences from cycle 1, I have identified X specific professional learning goals. So this is broad, as you can tell. But then the step 2 would be, these goals include, or based on these insights, the next steps for my professional growth include, and then finish by reminding the reader of the main point. By following this plan, I can actively work toward attaining my goals and deepening my professional growth. So just notice a couple of things here. First of all, the key words from the prompt are repeated. So we have cycle 1. Here we have professional learning goals. So those are exact words from the prompt. Next steps for professional growth. And then we have goals, plan, professional growth again here. So that's really helpful to just restate those terms, because your professor then kind of sees your connection to the prompt. Okay, the second half of this presentation will be on comparing research papers and literature reviews. So they're very similar in some ways. In both cases, research papers and literature reviews are going to be backed up by a lot of research, as you may guess. So we'll need citations throughout the paper. I would say usually every paragraph, and with literature reviews in the body of your paper, I would shoot for 2 to 3 citations, hopefully different from different authors in each paragraph. So they're heavily research based, but the approach for each is a little different. And so a research paper, or like the skill of writing research, is more like presenting your unoriginal argument about a topic. So you have an arguable thesis, you use sources as evidence, focus on analysis and then interpretation, but you organize it all around a claim. Literature review, on the other hand, these are more like reports on what researchers have said about a topic. So it's not so much you're claiming something, but you're just letting the research speak for itself. These are organized around themes, trends, or debates. They focus on summary and synthesis, and then evaluate agreements, disagreements, and perhaps gaps in the literature or the research where perhaps your project fills that gap. So sometimes both skills are used within the same paper. For example, at the beginning of a dissertation or capstone, the current research is focused around themes that emerge, and you would synthesize those. So this would be reporting on research. Then the rest of the paper presents the student's argument and what their observations and findings are, adding to the research. So this would be more of the research writing skill, making an argument based on findings. So if you're writing a capstone or dissertation, chapter 2 is usually often the literature review. And this shows trends, synthesizes data, points out gaps in the research. And then here's a video that I've created on writing literature reviews just by themselves, the videos just by itself. So this is really the focus here, is reporting on what research already exists. So these are those lit review skills. It's like a mirror where you are just mirroring what the research already says. But with chapters 1, 3, 4, and 5, or maybe 1, 3, and 4 for a capstone, these use more of the research paper skills. So this is where you're framing the importance of your study or your project and identifying the specific research questions you're trying to answer. So that's what usually appears in chapter 1. Chapter 3 is the methods often, and that justifies design choices. So what type of methodology you're using? Is this a qualitative paper or qualitative study, quantitative study? Is it mixed methods? There's a lot of detail here about how you are studying the material. And then chapters 4 and 5 present the findings and then interpret the findings. So chapter 5 is really the most like a research paper skill, research writing, because you are interpreting what you found and comparing it back to the research, or you're arguing for the implications. So what does this mean for future policy, practice, or research? So let me show you an example. The effectiveness of MTSS in improving student outcomes. So this would be how you might organize a literature review. So perhaps you would begin with what is MTSS and, just identify the basic tiers. Then you might have one section on tier 1, another on tier 2 and tier 3. And then you might end by talking about the gaps in the research. So what's missing? So for example, the tier 1 supports might show how universal interventions improve overall classroom behavior and academic engagement. Tier 2 are those small group supports. Tier 3 are intensive individualized interventions, and then how those support students in their engagement. And then finally, you might talk about the gaps. So for example, here, there are limited longitudinal studies and inconsistent measurement of outcomes. So this is where you might want to, this is kind of getting to your argument. So you're saying, since the research doesn't cover this sufficiently, that's what I'm going to do. So notice here, though, you're really basically summarizing and comparing the studies, identifying patterns and gaps, but not arguing for a specific situation. Whereas with a research paper, you would maybe write something like this. Although MTSS is widely adopted in K-12 settings, its effectiveness depends less on the framework itself and more on the consistency of Tier 1 implementation, suggesting that schools should prioritize universal supports before expanding intervention tiers. So this is a claim, right? This is something that can be argued. Other people might say, no, you have to do all 3 of the tiers equally. Or maybe, no, tier 3 is actually the most important. So this is saying, the consistency of tier 1 implementation is what's most important. And so this is taking a position, using research selectively to support that position, and contributing an interpretation or application. So you can see that both of those skills are at work even within the same project. So just keep that in mind as you are working through your projects. Make sure that if you have to argue for a specific claim, you're identifying that claim and providing research to support that. But sometimes you might only be asked to report the research, and that's what a literature review approach usually does. So in summary, with reflection papers, avoid them sounding like AI wrote them. Add plenty of examples and personal application. With a research paper, they're more focused on making an argument based on the research, whereas a lit review is more on reporting research without making an argument. So thank you so much for listening. This is information for you for how to set up an appointment for direct feedback. You can either go to this link or use this QR code. And just wanted to let you know that there is an upcoming event, Saturday, May 16th, if you'd like to attend that writing retreat. Thanks for listening and happy writing.